So productive sales requires pipeline velocity. So I think it starts with the mindset,
Hmm.
Enmo, because most founders are technical. They're
Right.
scientists, they're engineers, etc. So the first thing they need to do is forget everything they think they know about sales. And your job is to find people that are a really, really good fit with your product. That's your job. And if you find people that are a good fit and you figure out a way to help them, then the chances are pretty good that they're going to write you a check. The reality is all of sales is discovery.
Hmm.
Every step of the sales process is discovery.
Mm.
And notice that I'm talking about the problem, not the solution, because that's what gets people's attention. So in sales, no is your second best answer, and the slow no is your worst. Do you have the problem? Is it important to you? And are you interested in learning more about how we solve it?
Great. So, I was going through your presentation for Harvard. So you gave two presentations, I think, on sales about 4 years ago. So I found it really interesting. And one of the things I picked up is when you talk about sales, you say it is not about qualifying the leads. It is about disqualifying the leads, right? So I found that really interesting. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, I think, are an experienced salesperson, and you probably recognize that only a small percentage of the people that you meet and speak with actually become paying customers, right? In other words, it's a failure-driven profession. Most of the folks that you talk with should result in no thank you, but they don't,
Yeah.
because people don't say no. They have ulterior motives for learning from you and taking your valuable time and so forth. So it really becomes a matter of owning no and moving people out of your sales funnel gracefully
Hmm.
so that you can spend your time more wisely, more productively. So that's what I mean when I say that effective sales is primarily becomes a matter of disqualifying people that are in your funnel that will take your time, that will
Right.
look like a customer, but will never become a customer. You have to move them out of the funnel because they won't leave on their own.
Right. And it's a really tough thing to do, especially, if your funnel is small, if your product is new, if your product is, let's say, has a high price point, and if you are getting along really well with the customer, it is a really hard thing
Oh yeah,
mentally
yeah.
to
Especially those
disqualify
fun.
someone.
Oh yeah, especially those fun conversations,
Right.
right? It's really tough to say, "Hey, see you later."
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But at the end of the day, sales is about. I mean, you're bringing the do back to your team. You're bringing all that leverage back to the engineers and to the services people and to the administrator. I mean, you're driving the growth of a company, and you have a responsibility to bring in a multiple of what it costs you to sell, to a customer, which means, generally speaking, if you're not driving f- f- at least 4x of your cost in terms of revenue back to the company, you're not doing what's needed to
Right.
support the growth of the company. So yeah, it does take discipline. That's a big part of selling is discipline. Sure, it's fun, it's rewarding, but if you just have too much fun and sit back and have great conversations that don't result in revenue, you'll have a very short career.
That's right. And how further along were you along your, sales career when you figured that out for yourself?
So first of all, I never really had a sales career,
Okay.
Emil. I'm not a professional salesperson. I'm not a professional seller. I build companies.
Right.
I'm a founder, and in order to survive as a founder, you have to learn how to sell.
That's right.
So I had to figure out how to sell just to survive, just to grow, a company. And I discovered very early on that if I don't get good at this, I'm going to fail as a founder because I couldn't rely on somebody else to sell for me.
When was that? Was that at your first startup?
Oh yeah, my very first startup, that was a hard lesson that I
Right.
learned was hiring a professional salesperson was an expensive path to failure, that they were not equipped to understand and effectively sell something that I had invented.
Right.
So I had to basically own that. And I learned my first company that I had to cut the path to the customer. I had to figure out the recipe to revenue. I had to figure out who the customer was and define the target and how much they would pay and what the value was. I had to figure all that stuff out on my own. And once I figured that out, then I was in a position to, hire salespeople to follow the path that I had created. But hiring a salesperson to watch the Discovery Channel was a bad idea.
Right. And I have to say, it is, when I heard that, it is pretty counterintuitive, right? Because especially if you are a small company, you have a new product, you want to grow, startup or whatever, the thing that people want and expect, people running the company who want to, let's say, meet some figures, revenue figures, the way they usually want to operate is they want to hire an experienced sales team so that they can just come in and hit the ground running. They just want to, because they don't have time, right? So they want to have or hire experienced sales reps who can come in, hit the ground running, and just build up some revenue.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of the I would say that the common wisdom.
Right.
That's what you would think is, geez, if I want to drive sales, I hire salespeople because that's what they do. But what I've discovered is that you're ready to hire your first salesperson when you can say, go out and get me 100 more customers like these six, not go out and figure out who our customer is.
Right.
Because salespeople, they're not, they're like race car drivers, right? They need a car that is
Hmm.
competitive, right? That's the
Right.
product,
Yeah.
but they also need a track to drive around, and they need fans in the stands, existing customers, and they need a pit stop with people supporting them. They need all that stuff to be productive at what they do. And if you just tell them to go out there and win a race and you give them a car, but none of the other stuff, they're going to drive it right off a cliff and it's
Right.
going to be expensive.
Yeah. So your first company, what was the company called? And do you remember what product you were selling at the time?
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, sure, of course. So, my first company, I was not a founder. I was one of the first hires in the company.
Hmm.
And it was this thing called a browser. And it was the first commercial browser on the market. It was it was spun out of the CS department at Brown
Hmm.
University. And there were three founders. And it was the name of the company was called Electronic Book Technology. So that certainly ages it because we were actually competing against paper. And this was pre-internet.
Okay.
And it was a dynamic browser that was built around the SGML standard.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with SGML.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I'm not
Yeah,
a
it's
software
sort
guy,
of the
but
meta language from which XML and HTML are derived.
right.
It's an ISO standard. So it was built around the concept that the asset was your content. So we were taking like the 747 maintenance manual and
Hmm.
putting it on a CD-ROM, and it was multi-platform, multi-language, multimedia, dynamic, and it had an SDK, so you could create whatever interface you wanted around your electronic book. And
Okay.
we bootstrapped that company. I joined the company. I think I joined them I think it was 90 or 91,
Hmm.
and I was their first big customer.
Right.
I know that for a fact because they invited me to their office, and as soon as I bought the check with me to the Christmas party, I saw two people leave the room right away to run to the bank. And I know that even though the CEO and one of the founders left a very wealthy guy 6 years later with our acquisition, still don't think they allow him to have a credit card. I think he was, you know, borrowing from the future to make that company successful. When I joined the company, it was maybe 300,000 in revenue, and most of that was money that I wrote in a check as a customer, 250 of that. And we grew that company. We bootstrapped that company from over 5 years, 500,000 to 1.2 to 2.4 to 4.8 to 11.2 to 15 million. And it was acquired. It was acquired in the fall of '96 by a public company for a multiple of in cash, a
In
multiple of
cash.
sales. Yes, in cash.
Nice.
So, and we had no investors,
That's
and
great.
we had a great time. We had so much fun building that company. We had about 150 employees, and the founder asked me uh, to join as a salesperson because he was using me as a customer reference, and I was very effective at that.
Mhm.
And I said, "No, I don't like salespeople." And he goes, "Well, what about marketing?" I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Don't worry about it. I'll teach you what that is." So I joined running the marketing there, and part of that job was to build channels and support channel sales.
Right.
So we had channel sales partners all throughout Europe and Asia. We were generating about 30% of our revenue through channel partners. And one of my favorite things there was the channel partner meeting that we had in Verviers, Switzerland every January. And all of our partners would come in and we'd update them on the latest goings on with the product. And then we'd ski and drink for 5 days. So I think it is so fun because that was my first company, EBT, Electronic Book
Mhm.
Technology, and the product name was Dynatext. And what's so fun is 30 years later, Jim McDonald, who was our West Coast sales guy at EBT, is now my partner with at Spinnaker, where we are doing sales workshop and coaching. So
Right.
he retired out of Amazon 5 years ago, and he called me up and informed me he was joining me
So he
because I was
informed you that he's
he
joining
he
you
he
now.
informed me because I was having too much fun, and so we work, and we've been working closely for the last 5 years, growing a nice little training and consulting practice called Spinnaker Sales, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
That's a great story. And in this first company, when was the first time that you hired or went about hiring a sales team?
Well, it turns out that the founder and CEO was a pretty well practiced salesperson already. So he was doing the sales. So I wasn't doing the sales hiring there. I was really supporting hires that he was making. And he was sort of the first founder salesperson. So he was doing founder led sales. And I believe Jim McDonald might have been his first hire out in California. We eventually ended up with 7 or 8 salespeople direct in different territories here in the US with 3 inside salespeople supporting them,
Right.
doing old school cold calling
Yeah.
because, this was pre-internet.
Yeah.
And my job was sales enablement, training, PR, doing all the tools, plus building and supporting the channel sales partners.
And when you talk about, a founder doing sales, what are the ways that a founder can really enable sales in the company?
So I think it starts with the mindset,
Hmm.
Enmol, because most founders are technical. They're
Right.
scientists, they're engineers, etc. So the first thing they need to do is forget everything they think they know about sales because none of that stuff is appealing and none of it's going to work for them anyways. They won't be comfortable with it. So I think it starts with a mindset in that understanding that your job is to help people. Your job is to help people meet an unmet need or solve a problem. So you're a problem solver. You're an engineer. You're a doctor. You're helping people um, overcome a problem or meet an unmet need. And
Right.
if you can do that, transaction will naturally occur. So it's not about thinking about yourself as a salesperson, but thinking about yourself as really, a consultant and helping people solve their problems. And your job is to find people that are a really, really good fit with your product. That's your job. And if you find people that are a good fit and you figure out a way to help them, then the chances are pretty good that they're going to write you a check.
Right. So nowadays you have, 30 years of experience. So when you meet a team of founders or an early startup who that is struggling with sales, and you have a conversation with, let's say, the founding team, where do you start?
I jump right into their pipeline because that's where the action is, right?
Right, right.
So forget talking about sales. I jump
Mm,
right into their pipeline and I start pressure testing all their deals, right? And I'm looking at their top 10 deals and everything in their pipeline. And I'm just going through. And as it turns out, within several weeks, most of what they thought were legitimate sales opportunities in their pipeline don't belong there. So the
right,
first thing is to blow out the dead deals, the chaff, if you will, from the pipeline. And I think, as you pointed out in the beginning of our conversation here, that's a hard thing to do because you're blowing out things that are maybe fun or you've been investing a lot of your time in
right.
for many, many months.
Hmm.
And you keep them in there hoping and wishing they'll become a customer when they won't. They're just robbing your time away from doing something much more productive. So I jump right into the pipeline and start asking hard questions about what's going on, buying signals, stalling signals. I'm looking for all those things and then making cut and dry decisions in terms of moving them forward and moving them out.
Right. So what are some of the typical questions you start asking when you start going through the pipeline?
Well, it's really about asking those leading questions that take ambiguity and turn them into actionable buying or stalling signals that you can, with confidence, you can make a decision. One of them is, have they already tried to solve the problem that you solve? Have they already done something about that? Right? Even if they've done it poorly, right? That's a sign that it's a priority and that's a buying signal. So to the contrary, if you're solving a problem and they have the problem, but they've never done anything about it, that just means it's a low priority. So
So
they're
the it,
probably not they're
mm,
probably not going to invest in it. So that's just one example of a
mm,
question that you can ask of a founder or ask of a prospective customer that's going to give you a clear buying or stalling signal. Another one is, can you associate or attribute some economics to the problem? Are you going to make them money? You're going to save them money, reduce risk or whatever. Is there clarity around the return on investment, or is it ambiguous?
right. So if
Right.
your product is basically going to save money for the customers, make money for the customers, make them efficient, and that sort of thing.
Correct. And if
Mm,
you can directly attribute some economic driver to your product, you could probably build a business case around a return on investment to the customer. And that's another in if you have to think too hard about that, they're not qualified, right? If you really are scratching your head and you can't think about it, if you can't think about it, the customer can't think about it. So they're not going to buy from you, right? If there's no economic driver. Another one is there a active initiative inside the company to solve the problem? Does an executive, a well-respected executive, or is there a management initiative to do something about this?
right. So
Right?
if the problem is urgent in the company,
Yeah.
in the customer company,
Yeah, yeah. So those are three examples,
right.
and if the answer is no or weak in any of those areas, the answer is probably no. They're not. The answer is probably do nothing, and you're wasting your time continuing to keep the conversation on life support, inside your sales funnel.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if I put myself into the shoes of the founder, right? I mean, intellectually I might get it, but emotionally I'm so invested, it is really hard
Oh
to
yeah.
let go of the people, right? That's the first thing. And the second scary part is if someone like you comes in with 30 odd years of experience and just says, I've had a look at your pipeline, you have got like 100 leads or whatever, and 95 of them are useless. So now I have to start all over again. So what is the next thing you do with the founder? Where do you start then to really build the pipeline in such a way that at the potential leads are more fitting to your product or your business model?
Now, great question. So first of all, I'm not making that decision. I'm a coach. My
Right.
job is to upskill the founder so they
Hmm.
own the skills. So
Hmm.
I ask questions and then ask them what they're going to do.
Hmm.
And by the nature of the questions and how I describe the problem to them, they come around to their own realization that they're wasting their time. So they must recognize and they must make the decision to move something out of the funnel, not me, for the
Mm,
right reason. So it's all about coaching them to learn the right skill set and the right discipline to make those decisions on their own. Because if I do it for them, that's not sustainable. If I go away, the problem's just going to recur again.
that's correct.
So
Yeah.
I take a very much of a sort of a mentoring, a coaching sort of approach. To your question, starting anew, it's really asking the right qualifying questions up front to get clarity, right? A lot of people call the top of the funnel or the initial discussion that you have with a customer, they call that the discovery call. The reality is all of sales is discovery.
Hmm.
Every step of the sales process is discovery. You're just discovering different things as you mature the conversation. But initially, the discovery is pretty binary. Do you have the problem? Is it important to you? And are you interested in learning more about how we solve it? That's a pretty cut and dry. I mean, they either have the problem or they don't. And as I mentioned before, are they doing something about it? Is it an initiative? Can you tie it to economics, et cetera?
Hmm.
Is it a priority for them? If it's not a priority, they're not qualified, even if they have the problem, because you're not going to change their priorities. You know, people buy when they're ready to buy, not because of some sales magic.
Right. Right.
So you find out whether it's a priority. And then lastly, is there a genuine interest? If those conditions are true, do they have genuine interest about looking at you as a possible solution to their need?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a very rigorous, filtering method, right? So if you're doing it rigorously, I imagine that of the 20 odd customers you speak to, you really get you can probably get 5 of them into your funnel. So basically,
Out of 20, you may get two.
you make it 2.
Yeah.
And
The
yeah,
idea is you want to do a hard cut right at the beginning,
right.
because if you do a really good job there, then the sales, conversion to a customer is much, much greater. The sale becomes so much easier later on.
Got it. Yeah. But if you are doing that, I kind of get it. I definitely get it. But if you're doing that, the other scary part is, you always have to, let's say, find a lot of prospects, potential prospects or customers. So it
Absolutely.
is a really high volume game. So that is another scary part of, let's say, filtering your prospects in such a really rigorous way. So how do you go about helping the founders, helping the team to find a really big volume of potential, let's say, leads in
Yeah.
order to qualify them?
So 100%. Um, so productive sales requires pipeline velocity, right? And pipeline velocity only occurs when you have a continuous supply of leads being poured into the top of the funnel that meet your ideal customer profile, your ICP. And that means marketing is doing a whole bunch of different things. They're not just drawing from one source. They're doing a whole bunch of different things in order to find customers that meet that ICP, that meet your target customer profile. They may be doing outbound, they may be doing inbound, they may be doing events, you may have an ambassador program, you may be doing trade shows, and of course, you're totally exploiting your personal network and the network of anyone you might know. So you're looking at the marketing engine itself for lead generation really doesn't exist when you start a company. It's something that you really have to build, really starting with your own sort of devices in your own network. So you're networking your way into having those conversations. And it's really, really important that you find your first customers through your network, because those are trusted conversations,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
those are going to be really, really important conversations as a founder, because your company is going to be defined much more so by your first set of customers than it is by your business plan. So be careful who you ask for, right? You have to build it very tactically and very intentionally about, having customers. You need to be solving the same problem, the same use case for different companies and creating a pattern there. Because if the problem you solve is different
Mhm.
for your first set of customers, then you're going to be landing your first customer over and over and over again. You're not going to be able to scale sales because you're being too opportunistic and you're solving different problems for different companies. Now you're just a consulting company and you'll never scale. So when you have a product company, it's all about finding that pattern,
Mhm.
that repeatable pattern. Back to your question, eventually you're going to run out of people in your personal network and you have to come up with more formal mechanisms for generating qualified leads. So LinkedIn, for example, is a common B2B source of leads for a lot of early stage companies right now, but there's many, many other sources. It really depends upon the nature of your product, the industry that you're selling into, et cetera, et cetera. The customers have very different watering holes, places where they hang out. You have to find them where they hang out, where they cluster, and you have to figure out the key messages that get their attention and motivate them to want to learn more about your product. And
Right.
it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, even now with tools like LinkedIn, AI, ChatGPT, and so on, with all these resources, it is kind of hard thing to do. But I would imagine like 30 years ago, where you didn't have all these tools, like back then, how did you go about, like filling your funnel and finding all the leads?
Sure. So I'd like to point out that today is probably harder to find leads, even though everyone has the same tools. It turns into slop and noise. So now
Right.
you're lost in all the noise and the slop, right? And it's even harder because all the noise out there, and it's hard to break through all the noise. So now everyone, having the right tool is no longer a moat. Having the right skills for lead generation is no longer a moat.
Okay.
Everyone has the same tools. So now it becomes breaking through with clarity and messaging and so forth and value proposition and all that stuff. And it's really, really so much harder to do today than it was back in the day when you got somebody on the phone and they, they didn't spend the last 4 hours figuring out what they're going to buy over the internet and exercising their decision process over the internet and becoming very educated. Everyone's a very educated buyer today. And back in the day, it wasn't. You call somebody up and they were like, oh, you're educating them in something new that they might not even know about. So it's a very, very different game today than that was, even 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you were evangelizing and educating somebody and they were sticking with you, you had a pretty good chance of landing a paying customer.
Hmm.
Today, if you're evangelizing somebody, they're not going to become a paying customer, because if you're educating them in the problem that you solve, they're not going to buy from you because they know about that problem before you talk with them. So today is all about breaking through all of that noise, and it's a very different type of challenge, marketing challenge, than it was, even 10 years ago.
Yeah, but isn't it good if you call a prospect? Isn't it good that if he tells you that he already knows a couple of products in your category and stuff like that? Isn't it a positive sign? Because it is
100%.
right? It is a sign of he has a problem. He's
Yep.
being thinking through the issues
Yep.
and all that thing.
100%. Like when a company tells me that they have competitors that they're running into competition with their prospects, I say congratulations, because that means that people are actually looking to solve the problem and they're looking at, you know, potential solutions to their problem,
Right.
right? That's a very strong buying signal, is when you're talking to a company that is actively looking at your competition.
So, what are recommendations to people nowadays to, let's say, cut through the noise? Because it's so overwhelming sometimes. You get so many emails, you get so many LinkedIn messages. And
Yeah.
what are your recommendations to for people to kind of, cut through the noise?
And again, some of this is actually counterintuitive, but
Hmm.
you have to be different. You have to stand out. You have to do something different. One of the big differences that I do, is that I'm a big believer in, is to be super brief. Right. A lot of companies are guilty by explanation
Right.
in their marketing and their messaging, and because of the overload of noise out there, when you present somebody with something that is too long, that looks like it's going to require work to
Hmm.
read it and understand it, it's going to go
Hmm.
ignored.
Yeah, that's what I do. If I get a long email message from some company or
It's gone.
someone,
It's
it's gone.
deleted before you don't even look at it.
No, no, actually,
Right.
no.
So you
Yeah,
have 8 words to get somebody's attention, not 8 sentences.
right. So,
So you have to say, we have the best X that does Y. Is
hmm.
this worth, you want to look at it?
So I mean, do you coach your people to, let's say, if they are sending out a first email or a first message, do you coach them to just do it in a couple of sentences?
Yes, absolutely.
Crisp,
Yeah, absolutely. Occam's razor principle
right.
applies. People's patience, diminishing return occurs very early on people's patience
Hmm.
when you're selling them something. A lot of people buy, but they don't like to be sold to. So you have to be really, really focused and specific, direct about what you're doing. If you can't get somebody's attention within seconds
Hmm.
of something that you're communicating, whether that's done verbally or through, a post on the internet or an email or whatever, you've lost the sale at the starting line.
Right. And how is the response been to your, let's say, tip from all of the people you are coaching? Is it a positive one when you are, let's say, very brief, concise, couple of sentences in the first message or email?
I think it makes a big difference in the performance. And personally, I demand it because I'm impatient myself,
Yeah,
and
me
I'm
too.
not. I look at something, I'm like, ah,
Yeah, yeah,
I have no patience for that,
yeah.
and I just like I kill it on the spot. Say,
Yeah.
so I'll start with the team. I'll get the team around,
Hmm.
and I'll say, okay, all right, everyone, I want you to write a paragraph about the problem that you solve. 4, 5, 6 sentences. Everyone, I want you to write that down, right? And so give everyone 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. Now I've got 6 people, and they've all written their own paragraph. And I say, okay, now I want you to write one sentence about the problem that you solve. Not a paragraph, but one sentence. All right. Now it becomes harder, right? Now they have to distill it down to a sentence. I said, and I give them another 5 minutes because it's harder. Now everyone's done with the one sentence. And I said, okay, now I want you to reduce that to 5 words. Okay. And I give everyone another 5 minutes. And then lastly, all right. And what's the tag for it? What's the one word?
Oh, that's really tough. That's really tough.
Right. Well, when you get down to the end, those last two things, you're starting to get close to the essence of the problem that you solve. And maybe you can build some messaging around that. It's like reducing it down to the essence of it. And then you can put the team around and start comparing what they came up with in those
Hmm.
5 words or those one sentence, right? And try to craft something with it. But now you've got sort of the fundamentals of the problem that they solve.
Hmm.
And notice that I'm talking about the problem, not the solution, because that's what gets people's attention. Is
Yeah,
if you can describe their problem, that gets their attention. If you're there making statements about your solution or describing your solution, it's just noise. It's just
yeah.
more noise. But if people are convinced you understand their problem and very succinctly, they're probably going to give you permission to describe how you help them.
Right. But I think, in my experience, it's really hard to do that. Let's say distill down your product, everything you know about the product, since you know it inside out, to let's say even 3 sentences is really hard. Like 5 to 6 words, and then one tag. That's really hard because you know all the characteristics of your product, you know all the advantages of your product, right, for the customers, and
Yeah, but
leaving.
I'm not talking about the product. I'm talking about
Yeah,
the problem. I'm talking about the customer problem.
customer problem. Yeah.
That, right? In
Right.
you that I'm not talking about the product.
Hmm.
The product product is the product. When you communicate the product, you
Mhm.
don't talk about the features, you don't talk about the capabilities, you talk about the value of the product. You talk about what is the value that the customer can expect from using your product, right? How are they going to benefit from it? And if that gets their attention, then they might be interested in how you do it. And a
Right.
lot of founders and a lot of salespeople fail by starting with the how, right?
Right.
They start talking about the product, the features, the capabilities. I mean, the classic failed sale is when you demo your product the first time you meet somebody. What a ridiculous waste of time because, first of all, you understand nothing about the customer and the
Hmm.
problem and their priorities. So you can't really speak directly to that when you're demoing the product. So you're going to miss something. And first of all, they're not even qualified yet. You haven't even determined whether or not the problem you solve is a priority inside their company. So you're wasting your time.
Right.
So I see that all the time is founders, technical founders, they go right to their comfort zone, which is their baby, their product. They're right,
Right.
right. They go right to it. And it's almost like a crutch because they're really proud about it. And they want to tell the whole world about how beautiful their baby is. Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
all they want to do. And they're
Yeah.
just totally wasting their time.
Right. So what are the elements that need to be in this, let's say, first initial message or email interview? Should there be a short introduction of yourself, of the sender, of the problem you're trying to solve, of the company, of the product? So what details or elements should this first, let's say, message entail?
I think it really has to be narrowed down to you are a company and this is the problem we solve.
That's it. And
Yeah.
if you like it, if you have that problem,
If
feel
you
free
have
to
this
call me or
problem, you're
whatever.
interested in learning more, we solve it in a very unique, valuable way.
Mhm.
Right? It's again, it's a mindset, it's an attitude thing. Not everyone's going to become our customer, but for the right company, our product is make a huge difference in solving this problem. It's not a fit for everybody,
Right.
but for the companies where it's a good fit, it makes a big difference.
And before you start sending out the messages, you have to really figure out, what your ideal customer is going to be. If you're selling B2B, you have to figure out what your ideal customer business is going to be. So how do you go about, figuring that out if you're selling B2B?
Sure. So it's called the ICP, the ideal customer profile. It starts sort of think of it as concentric rings.
Hmm.
And at the outer ring is one or more industries, and then of a type of company within that industry, right? And a size of company, and maybe even a location. So, for example, I'm selling into the financial services industry and I'm selling solutions into family offices that manage over 50 million in assets within 25 miles of Boston. That's an example of the outer ring. That'll get you to the address, right? If it doesn't get you to the website or the street address of a company, it's not well defined enough.
So why the need to be so precise and so well defined?
Because when you start a company, you have a very, very narrow focus.
Hmm.
And the more narrow your focus is, the more likely you're going to find people that resonate with your product. The problem, you don't start a company with a broad focus. Like, look at Amazon. How did they start? What were
Selling
they
books.
selling? They were selling
Books.
books,
Yeah.
right? And then they started to build out peripheral sales based upon their success with selling books. So what is your book, right? What is your logical starting point? A lot of founders, I think, struggle with focusing. You have to niche down your focus almost to the point where it's painful. And where a lot of founders struggle with that is they confuse that with limiting their destination,
That's right.
limiting their possibilities,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's not. It's where you get started. So the whole point of being very specific about the outer ring of the ICP is you're targeting companies that are most likely to be interested in what you're selling because your product is purpose built for companies just like them in their industry. And the more you can speak specifically to their specific needs, the higher the likelihood they're going to want to listen to you because they know that you're not solving everyone's problem. You're just solving a problem that's very specific to them.
Yeah, right. And I think it is counterintuitive because, when you start a company, found a company, whatever, you want a lot of people, ideally thousands or millions of people to use your product, right? So if you narrow it down like that, you're basically excluding everyone else at the expense of that precise company profile. And I think that is, in a way, a scary proposition because you are excluding everyone else.
Well, what's scary is when you're not focused and you are investing all of your precious time talking to anyone that'll listen to you, but they're not going to buy from you because you're not speaking directly to their specific needs.
Right.
And again, it's primarily a function of the nature of the problem you're solving and the product, right? How you can narrow it down. But the point is that by narrowing down your focus does not define your destiny as a
Right.
company. It just defines where you're getting started. So it's called your beachhead in sales. What is your beachhead? What is that narrow part of land? Where's the soft landing on the beach? You're not going to sell into the rock pile. You're not going to sell into the guns. You're going to sell into the soft, warm, white sand, right? Where
Right.
there's early adopters and there's some competition and there's, people that are more likely to buy from you, that you're establishing your first set of customers there. The ring inside that is your champion, is your end user. It's the person inside that organization who stands to gain or lose the most
Hmm.
by using your product or not using it.
Right.
So if the outer ring gets you to the front door of the business, this is the person you ask for when you knock on the door, right? This is the person that is most impacted by your product. They own the problem, they're in charge of it, et cetera. So in the prior example, this might be the research analyst that's looking at investment opportunities for the family office that's using really old, inefficient, and error-prone research methods.
Hmm.
And you have a way of taking something that ordinarily takes 2 weeks and you can compress it into an hour and a half with a lot more accuracy.
Right. So
And
what are some of the most effective research methods, let's say, once you have drilled down your ideal customer company? So, what are some of the research methods you recommend people using to be efficient to go and find all these companies?
well, I mean, most of your target customer is going to be defined in terms of a title or a role within that company.
Hmm.
So once you define the company, then you got to sort of spread your attention around the 4 or 5 different names or titles of that role that might be, maybe it's called the product manager, maybe it's called the program manager, maybe it's called the director of this or the manager of that, or there's going to be keywords in there associated with the problem you solve. Right. And it's almost always the case that regardless of what you're selling, there's going to be a limited number of roles or titles that you can discover that are associated with or being most impacted by the product that you're selling, that this is the person that you want to reach inside that company.
So, the next step would be find a company and then find the people with these titles and try to reach out to them and
Correct.
see if they have that problem or see if they have the urgency to get that problem solved.
Yeah. Do they care about this problem? Is it important
Right.
to them? Have they tried to solve it but failed? Is it important to them? Right. So they're already aware of the problem. They may have tried to solve it, even though poorly. And you come along and you've got a really, really dialed in solution to that, and they care about it.
Right. So once you have this, ideal company profile, till you have that validated, it is just an assumption, right? So you have that, you go out and you start finding this company, talking to the people inside the company, and it could as well be, or there is a possibility that they don't respond to your value proposition.
Yep.
So in that case, do you recommend like building, 2 or 3, let's say, ideal customers or ideal companies that you should target in the beginning
Well,
instead of
yeah,
just one?
initially, your value proposition doesn't resonate with your ICP. That's
Hmm.
called bad product market fit.
Right.
And you have to find another ICP where your value proposition resonates.
Yeah, because in the beginning you don't know. When you're just starting out, till you've nailed it down, you don't know
Yeah,
what the
you have a
ideal
theory,
ICP
you have
is.
a
Yeah,
working theory, but
right,
it's almost like you have a Geiger counter in your hand and you're holding it around, you're waiting for the click,
right, right.
but you have to be intentionally have a pretty wide, audience there.
Yeah, but also there is a possibility of, if you target too many of these profiles at once, there is also the possibility of you spreading yourself thin, right?
Yeah, yeah. You have to find the one that resonates and you have to find the ICP that you feel represents a good logical starting point for building your
Mhm.
company on because it's representative of the market majority. There's an early adopter, and it doesn't have to have a huge addressable market,
Mm.
right? It just has to be a place where you can actually get established and confirm the value to the customer and the revenue model. And then you can look at adjacencies around that where you can expand the market to other markets that are probably have higher potential or whatnot. But you have to find that starting point.
Right. So till you find that, it's just a kind of, trial and error process till you find that
It's
ideal
very painful and
Yeah.
can take years. It can take 2 or 3 years, and it's really, really frustrating. A lot of founders, frankly, don't survive that
Yeah.
because they just run out of gas and they never find that message and market that resonates with the problem they solve. This is why whenever I work with a company, I'm often asked, when do I begin selling? And my
Hmm.
answer is yes.
What does that mean?
That means right away. In other
Right
words,
away.
if your product is done before you start selling, you've waited way too long to sell your product, and you're likely going to fail because you didn't build it with the market, you build it for the market. So founders that start with an early prototype, an imagination, etc., of a vision of the problem that they're solving, and then they engage the market right away and look for design partners, early adopters that are willing to help them shape the product, and they'll invest their time and resources in helping you shape it. That's how you build a company. Right? So if you build a product with the marketplace, you're likely to be successful. If you build it for the marketplace, you're going to get a whole bunch of, yeah, that's interesting, but you're missing this, but you get a lot of yes buts
Right.
because you didn't engage the marketplace early. So it's really, really important that you engage the marketplace as soon as possible, as soon as you've got something that approximates the problem that you're solving and how you're going to go. You have something that tangible enough for people to look at it. And Eric Ries calls it the minimum viable MVP, the minimum viable product.
Right. So what would be a good example of that? So once you've started building, you're not yet done, you have a rough sketch of whatever you're building. How do you go about, finding the potential, let's say, customers?
Well, that's the hunt for the product market fit in the
Hmm.
ICP,
Hmm.
right? So you start looking for the companies that are most representative of the problem that you're solving. And really that effort can vary in complexity from pretty straightforward to ridiculously complex depending upon the nature of the problem you're solving. So for example, if I built some instrumentation and some analytic software to provide non-destructive testing of oil and gas pipelines
Hmm.
to solve a regulatory problem, it's pretty obvious who my customer is. It's the people that own and service those pipelines. And I
Right.
know exactly where they are. They're probably down in Texas or they're in Oklahoma or they're up in Canada or I know, and there's a limited number of there's a limited number of customers and you're looking for the people that are doing the testing in the compliance within the
Right.
organization. And you're going to say, yeah, I've got a non-destructive way of doing it that's 10 times faster and 50 times cheaper than what you're doing today. And you're going to get their attention. That's pretty straightforward. But if you have a product that's very, very broad,
Mm.
right, where you solve a lot of problems for a lot of industry, in other words, it's horizontal,
Hmm.
right? You got a completely different exercise in terms of finding the logical starting point and product market fit, because it's really easy to get the attention of a lot of different people that may or may not be interested in buying from you.
That's really tough, right?
Yeah. So it really depends upon the nature of your product as to how challenging narrowing down and confirming your product market fit. And, I mentioned Eric Ries in minimum viable product. This is where you start. Where you end up, your goal is also called MVP. I call it market validated product. That's when somebody writes you a check, right? In the time and the difference between Eric Ries's definition of MVP and mine could be 2 years, right? Going from a prototype and shaping it to the market needs and actually building it out to the point where you can actually deploy it into production use and debug it and get it so it's actually functioning. And then you actually document the value so that you have a reference case study that you can sell to others. That could take you a couple of years to do till you have a product that you can actually start selling in the market. Now you've got the second definition of MVP, market validated product. Now you're ready. Now you're ready as a founder. If you've got 3 or 4 early design customers are using it and validate it, and you're solving the same problem for different companies, now you're ready to consider hiring your first salesperson.
And where in that process, let's say, in that development process, do you start engaging with the first possible customers? Because you're not going to wait till the product is completely
Yesterday,
done, right? What does that mean? Yesterday,
right away.
right away,
As soon as you got something that's demonstrable that represents the problem you're out there talking to people and you're saying, "Hey, I'm solving this problem. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think?" Oh, yeah, yeah,
right,
no, 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 yeah, yes, 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 right, yeah. You're trying to find early adopters. You're trying to find design partners that care about the problem you solve, right? And
right,
it might be that there's a solution out there that's been there for 20 years, and the solution and you've designed a much better solution that gets people's attention saying, yeah, yeah, that's been around for 20 years. We don't do anything about it. We just have accepted that thing as the new normal. And are you telling me that you can do something better than that for 1/10 the price in 1/5 of the time? You've got my attention,
right.
right? I understand it's not done. I'm interested in helping you shape that. What's your offer, right?
Yeah. So the other thing you talk about a lot is, this thing called communication. And in one of the presentations, you said that although even people who've been to like the best business schools and so on are not that good at communicating, right? So what do you mean by that? And what is the essence of good communication for you?
Well, um, my answer might seem funny since a lot of my answers with you today have been somewhat long-winded.
It's fine. Go for it.
Being brief, right?
Just be brief.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the old saying, "Hey, listen, I would have I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time."
Time. Yeah.
Right? Or look
Yeah.
at Picasso. Look at his drawings, right? If he were to do a drawing of a perfectly sculpted, bison, that wouldn't be worth anything. But his stick drawing of a bison sells for $3 million because he's boiled it down to the essence of, and he's done it in one simple stroke that everyone, when they see that, they say, "Oh, that's the essence of a bison and it's worth 3 million."
Right.
And it took him a lot of work to boil that down into just the essence. Anything that is brief and to the point and resonates with people and gets their attention, it takes a lot of work.
Yeah. So it is, in your view, the same with written as well as verbal communication to the customers. Let's say you're sitting in a meeting, you just want your people to be brief, to the point, and just ask the right questions and shut up and listen to the customers.
Absolutely. Give people the high level answer. Stop talking. Listen. If they're interested in learning more, they'll ask you, and then you can give them details. Same thing
Right.
with marketing. Give people a half a page
Hmm.
at a very high level. And if they're interested in learning more, they'll ask you. But if you
Right.
give them 5 pages, that's going right into the bucket,
Right.
right?
Right.
So start with something that's very, very brief that gets people's attention. And if they're interested in learning more, they'll always ask you. Otherwise, just stop talking and listen. You're going to learn a lot more by listening than you will talking.
Yeah. And again, this point is runs very counter to the popular belief of salespeople being able to talk a lot and being able to tell stories, come up with all these narratives and that sort of thing when they're, let's say, talking to people, right?
Stories and narratives are hugely important and valuable if you tell
Hmm.
them authentically,
Hmm.
but if you don't tell them at the right time,
Yeah.
if you don't tell them because they're highly relevant to a discussion that you're having with somebody that they feel helps them better understand something or is of value to them, then you're just wasting your time.
Right. So if I researched correctly, you built three startups and sort of sold all three of them. Did you in any of those companies go about hiring salespeople yourself? I mean, assembling the sales team yourself.
You know, it was so funny. Um, and this is the God honest truth. Yeah, I had good ideas for
Right.
all three of my companies. They were very innovative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I did a great job selling them
Hmm.
myself.
Hmm.
In all three of my companies, I never hired a salesperson because I never made it to that level of growth because I was acquired all three times very early on because it was the great land grab of the internet when I started
Mm,
building my companies.
right.
And there wasn't anyone sober on the buy side or the sell side. Everyone was just drunk with greed.
Yeah.
Right. And I was out there, I kicked my shoes off and I was just innovating as quick as I could, standing up companies and new products and writing the business plan and grabbing the URL and writing the thing behind it. And one of my companies, I never even ran. It was purchased by a PE company and it was just a URL and a 2-page business plan.
Crazy.
It was crazy. The other ones I actually funded and ran. One was VC backed and one was angel backed. And I
Hmm.
actually ran, but I was the salesperson in both, and they got acquired early, very early in our journey. And I have to say that my fortune was really more a function of timing as much
Right.
as probably more than anything else. I mean,
Hmm.
you don't do that today. Today, you don't do a startup like that anymore. People are very sober today,
Yeah.
with,
Well,
with the exception of all the stuff that's going on in AI and crypto
right. Yeah. Yeah.
right now. But I've seen those waves before,
Hmm.
right? Same things happening, people throwing money at it. It's like any other wave, right?
Right.
They
Right.
are way overhyped in the beginning,
Hmm.
but they're way underappreciated in the end.
Right. Right. So the question I was alluding to was, if you were to, let's say, hire some salespeople to get a sales team together, or if you're coaching some people in a startup or founders in a startup, what are the attributes that you look at when you are trying to hire a salesperson?
So I'm looking for an athlete,
Right.
right? I'm looking for somebody that likes to compete, that
Hmm.
that knows how to be coached,
Hmm.
that knows how to work with a team, to be a part of a team, somebody that's experienced wins and losses and
Right.
knows how to get up after a loss,
Hmm.
and somebody that knows the clock is ticking and that their role on the team is going to be a function of their performance.
Well, that's the hardest part in sales, I think.
Well, I mean, most athletes understand that. And when I
Yeah.
say athletes, I'm not talking about professional
Hmm.
athletes. I'm talking about people that played club sports or, people that just, they got involved in athletics through their
Hmm.
whole life because they found it very rewarding, right? And people that seek athletics or team sports, early on through their childhood and through high school and college, they make great salespeople for the reasons that I mentioned.
Right. I mean, it is always one of the biggest challenges in sales, the pressure you have to deal with. And you still need to like keep your composure when you're talking to your prospects,
Yeah. Hey, the game
customers, and so
clock.
on and
There's
so.
2 minutes left in the game. The game's going down. We're down by 3 points. I got to
Yeah.
kick this thing through that thing at 45 yards, and I have
Right.
to do it with some poise.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
not easy.
No. But people that have played team sports
Yeah.
have been presented with that situation many, many times. They've experienced it and they've learned how to thrive within that. They're not afraid of it. They're
Yeah.
very familiar with it and they've learned how to operate and thrive within that type of pressure. Some people actually perform better under pressure.
Yeah. Right.
Some people, like personally for me, unless I'm under pressure, I'm doing something else. But when the pressure's on for me to do something, I get very, very focused.
Yeah.
Right. And,
Right.
so some people don't function well, under pressure and, they probably won't thrive, in a sales role.
Yeah. Are there any other attributes that you look at when you're hiring for a sales role?
Yeah. So people buy when, from knowledgeable people that are credible.
Hmm.
So you have to have a mind or a practice of the problem and the solution that you're selling, and you have to own that, right? So if you don't have the education or the knowledge behind that that's relevant to the problem or the solution, you're not going to do well in sales. Now, to take that to the sort of the, um, you know, extreme, salespeople that are selling into the medical device industry, right? Or hospitals, the best salespeople have an MD on the end of their name,
Mm.
right? Because they get credibility right away and they're going to get the attention. So MDs are selling to MDs,
Right.
right? Or if you're selling into the pharmaceutical industry, if you've got a PhD on the end of your name in chemistry or biology with some experience there, you're going to get the attention of the people that have PhDs inside the pharmaceutical industry. So
Right.
that's another factor. And again, depending upon the nature of the product that you're selling, having the credentials and the education and the experience and the knowledge of the product matters a whole bunch,
Right.
because you can share with people your lived experience in solving the problem as part of your career,
Hmm.
and you can empathize with them on a peer basis, not a sales basis.
Right. And also, there are so many variables in this game that you cannot control. I mean, you cannot control anything, right? You cannot control the timing. You cannot control the decision that the customer makes. You
Nope.
cannot control, like in every company you have, especially if you're selling an expensive product to a big company, you have, I don't know, 6, 7 stakeholders that have to sign off, right?
Yep.
You cannot control any of that.
Nope.
So how do you usually coach people to go around that problem or deal with that problem?
Well, in sales, there's only two things you can control: your attitude and your behavior.
Right.
Your attitude is, I'm going in with an open mind. My attitude is, I'm there to help you and I have your best interests in mind and you can trust me. That's my attitude. And my behavior is really one of discipline and focus and skills and working my way through and doing the best I can to reach the right people in an organization and create alignment around the problem that I solve among people with different roles and responsibilities inside an organization. And I view that kind of like a puzzle,
Mm.
right? It's a challenge and you have to figure out who those people are and get them aligned. So it's your attitude and your behavior. Those are the only two things you control in sales. You know, if you're if you're losing deals to people that have the problem that you solve and you have the solution to solve that and you're still losing deals, then you have to really examine your own attitude and your own behavior, right? And you have to figure out how to upskill and become more disciplined and more focused and learn how to get up in the morning, even though yesterday might have been a crummy day,
Right.
with a fresh perspective and the same sort of go out and try to find people that you can help sort of attitude. Not everyone's wired to do that.
No, absolutely not. I think that's one thing. And the other thing is, I think also, dealing with pressure and such, you can learn it with experience a lot. That's been at least my experience. As time passes by, as you deal with more and more pressure situations at work, deadlines, and so on, sometimes people not delivering like 1 hour before the deadline, all that stuff, and you try to still remain calm, composed. A lot of it, I think, does come with experience and time as well.
No,
You
no,
do, yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. And you know what? When you go to hire somebody as a founder, half of their success is on you, right? And your ability to support them and give them the room and learn on their own and support them and help them survive their own learning journey on
right.
all the nuances and subtleties that they need to learn about selling your product to make them successful. And you have to give them enough room and support in order to do that. Oftentimes, the first sales hire fails in a startup due to the founder's lack of attention and support to the salesperson. They're like, oh, yeah, just go out and sell it,
Right.
right? Or they hire the person too early before they've defined the path to revenue, the recipe to revenue, and they
Mm.
expect somebody to come in and figure that out for them. And that's never gonna work.
So do you think it is in any company the responsibility of the founders or of the management to find, let's say, define the product clearly first and define the customer clearly first and find that product market fit? Is that your point of view?
And get a check and define the value. Absolutely. Listen, unless you're selling a fire extinguisher to people whose house is on fire,
Yeah.
right? That's pretty much the case. You got to figure it out because most B2B sales, most enterprise sales, you're solving a complex problem or a
Yeah.
complex need. If it wasn't complex, it wouldn't be a problem,
Right.
right? And it requires some innovation, right? And some work to describe what it is that you're doing, how, and comparing it to the customer's alternatives. So there's some complexity that's usually involved with that. And the founder's responsibility is to create a pathway, a roadmap for others to follow, saying, hey, this is the customer. This is the problem we solve. This is the messaging we use to get their attention. This is the value and how the value is calculated within our customer. And here's the benefits that they can expect from using our product. And this is how much they pay for it. And here's our revenue model, right? And here's some marketing material to support different aspects of the sale. Good luck. And I'll support you. Call me. Let's talk once or twice. Let's look at who you're talking to, what their objections are, and let me help you get better. Right? An expert is somebody that's made all the mistakes, right?
Right.
So they've got to make all the mistakes before they start to narrow down and focus their time and become productive. And that
Right.
doesn't happen overnight with a complex problem.
No, it doesn't. And also with complex solutions, right? Especially
Yeah.
the solutions of products are, let's say, very novel in nature.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It is really tough for customers. Firstly, it is easy for you to explain because you know the product and the problem you're solving, but it is not that easy for customers to wrap their head around the product and the problem you are solving for them.
They're going to have to invest some valuable time in order to do that. And that's why it's so important to start with the value that they can expect from the product, how they benefit from it first, because that's what buys you time. If people feel like they're investing their time because they're going to get a positive outcome, they're going to benefit from it. You have to define what that benefit is from the
Mm.
beginning to buy that time. Because if you don't start with that benefit, people get pretty impatient with you explaining, how you solve that problem.
Right. And when you're going, working with companies and startups and founders, when you're going through this exercise of defining the ideal customer or ideal company to sell to, how long does it take for you to, let's say, go through this exercise and have the first ideal customer profile in place or first ideal company profile in place?
So there is no sort of pat answer to that. It's
Hmm.
really a function of the industry or industries you're selling into and the nature of the problem you're solving and the
Hmm.
complexity of your product.
Right.
It could vary greatly from several months to several years or 3-4 years. I mean, if you're doing a new drug, right?
Yeah, I mean, drugs is an extremely long process.
Yeah. But generally speaking, just and I've worked with hundreds of early
Mhm,
stage companies, primarily at MIT, but also at a lot of the accelerators,
mhm,
around the world.
mhm.
It's a couple of years. It's 18 months. It's 3 years. It's somewhere in there for people to really start to focus in on their messaging and their ICP and their value and so forth. It takes some time.
But if you do a workshop with a team, let's say for a couple of days, isn't it possible to, let's say, come up with ICP after the workshop? Let's say a day,
Oh,
two,
sure,
three.
sure. No, you
Yeah,
give them a method. You could
yeah.
give them a method. You could give
Mm,
them this is the framework,
mhm.
right? So that it defines how they think about it. And therefore it makes them much more likely to end up with something that's narrow versus sort of a broad framework. So
Right,
really when in terms of the training itself, it's really just a framework, a set of skills, a set of practices, a set of way of thinking about things that will lead a founder to the right answers much more quickly than if they were to left to their own desire and thinking about something a very different way. So it's
right.
really giving them the tools to think about things in a way that's more likely to produce the results that they want.
Right. So once you have the tools or the framework as a founder, right? I think it should be possible to figure out your first ICP, let's say in an afternoon or 2 days of work or so.
Well,
So
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, but again, it's a working theory,
yeah,
Enmo.
yeah, yeah.
It's a working theory, and then you have to go out and validate it.
Right,
And
exactly.
and you have to be careful not to put all your eggs in one basket, because if it doesn't resonate, you have to think it through and say, okay, there might be 2 or 3 different use cases for my product.
Right.
Which one of these is the strongest use case? The early adopter, the one that is willing to pay more because the cost of the problem is more expensive. This is somebody that I can reach, that it's addressable. Yeah, so I'm very busy these days at MIT mentoring companies and
Right.
also teaching the course.
Yeah.
And that the video, by the way, that you saw, the Harvard alumni
Right.
entrepreneurship, Harvard finally reached out to me in year 4 and asked me to teach the course inside their academy.
Right.
Um, and I just noticed today that I think they're deciding to take the video down off of
Why?
YouTube. I don't know.
It's crazy.
I gotta talk to them. I don't know. It would seem to me that that would drive interest toward their academy, not take it away. But I'm also very busy doing workshops and coaching. I'm coaching, I think, 6 different ventures right now, primarily in the AI and crypto
Right. So
space.
is it like 6 different companies you are coaching at the moment?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So what is the scope of your, or what has been the scope of your work um, with Harvard? So were you giving classes, or were you just giving a couple of
Well,
presentations?
so years back, I was a regular lecturer there in the business school, um, as a guest of what was called the Sales and Business Development Club.
Hmm.
So it was a student club at Harvard, and I got there by way of my IAP course that I've been teaching at MIT since 2008. And when I say IAP, it stands for Independent Activity Period. And it's a January period at MIT where the students are allowed to attend anything they want for any interest, right? It's
Right.
non-matriculated.
Hmm.
So it could be like, learning how to make ice cream, for example.
Right.
Doesn't matter. And it's open to Tufts students, Harvard students, and MIT students. And I've been doing that since 2008. And it gradually started to pick up a lot of momentum and interest. At the Institute this January, I had 215 people attend.
In the
So
lecture,
yes, it's a very popular course among founders that want to survive the first 2 years of
first 2 years.
their
Yeah.
venture. Anyways, it's open to Harvard students and MIT students. Do you know how you can tell the Harvard students?
No, no
They'll
idea.
tell you.
And the MIT ones?
Yeah, they're very meek,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
very understated, etc. Anyways, to your question, I started lecturing at HBS up until the COVID hit, and then everything just went dark. And then I think a professor or two got wind or decided they would use that timeout period to create a sales course because they saw all the interest I was getting there. I was actually filling up the lecture hall at HBS every time I would go up there. There was people sitting in the aisles,
Yes.
right? Because there were people that were really thirsty, and there's a big trend of people that are graduating with the getting an MBA there. Instead of going to Wall Street, they were going to big tech.
Yeah.
And then instead of going to big tech, they were becoming founders, right? So it was very popular. And then it all of a sudden just disappeared, with COVID.
Yeah.
And then out of that, HAE 4 years ago asked me to do that video, and it's the highest rated video on YouTube right now for startup sales.
Yeah, it's really good and it's really practical. I mean, you can read a lot about sales, but there is a lot of difference between reading about sales and really going about practical sales on a day-to-day basis, right?
Well, I mean, I had to figure out a way that worked for me.
Right?
And if it worked for me, then I can explain it to somebody else.
Yeah.
If something works for me, I can kind of, I can put it in a framework and teach it. And it took me, honestly, 10 years of teaching that course until I felt like I had a pretty repeatable framework that I could teach outside the Institute and more.
Right.
It just didn't appear right away. It started out as a 2-hour lecture. And today it's 5 half days
Right.
where I teach. The Harvard lecture is only, not even a half day. I think it's 70 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, and my workshop now is 10 90-minute modules.
And when you got started, what was the motivation for you to, you know, share your experience and practical selling experience with all these students at Harvard and other schools?
Well, I struggled a lot myself and it
Hmm.
was painful. And I saw this as an opportunity to really fill a really important missing gap
Hmm.
with founders and to help them. So it was really one of just helping to support the next generation of founders and giving them something that, listen, you know how satisfying it is when you give something that they really, really, really need and they value and it works for them,
Right.
and then they succeed as a result of something that you help them with. I find that really satisfying.
Right.
So,
Can you mention some of the companies or founders you've coached in the past couple of years?
so I take confidentiality very seriously.
Seriously.
Yeah, yeah. I've literally worked with hundreds of companies,
Hmm.
um, for 3 months, for 6 months, for 2 years, and everything in between. And 95% of my engagements are very successful, um, because I focus on practical things in their pipeline, help them close deals, help to upskill them, really focus on the things that matter. When they fail, it's because the founder runs out of funding or they lose support or they're just uncoachable,
Yeah.
right? But if they're coachable and they have a product that's competitive, it's going to be a good engagement given enough time to focus in on it. And it's a lot of fun. I get the same satisfaction today as I did 10 years ago. The coaching is really the application of the framework
Right.
to the unique product, skills, industry, and people on the team. So I have a lot of fun kind of figuring that out and applying it. Yeah, it's equally satisfying.
Right. And when you're looking to work with a founder and just figuring out for yourself if the person is coachable or not, what are, let's say, the attributes you're looking for when you start the conversation?
Well, first of all, I'm looking for drive and hunger,
Hmm.
right? Like there's a real need. And that's the big difference between working with a founder that's jumped off the cliff
Hmm.
and working with a student that's taken an MBA program, right? They haven't jumped off a cliff. They're in
No.
they're they're in the safety zone and they're getting a degree and they're not at risk.
Yeah.
But founders, they're at risk,
Right.
right? The clock is ticking, right? And it's really loud. So, if they're at risk and there's really a strong demand or desire, that makes a big difference in the coaching relationship because I know that they're going to pay really, really close attention and they're going to follow through on all the things that we discuss and agree to, et cetera, because they know the clock is ticking and they're at risk.
Right.
But the reality is you don't know whether somebody's coachable until you work with them for a while. People can appear to be coachable, they can say the right things, but it's not until they actually deliver on that and follow through on it and do all the things. They have to hold up their end of the bargain, right?
Right.
Coaching, right? I'm not out in the field, I'm not performing it. And if they're not actually going through the motions and making the changes and adopting the work that we do together, I'm wasting my time.
Right. So basically, you give the framework, you show them the way, and it's their responsibility to carry it
apply
through,
that
apply
apply
that.
that framework to their business, and I'll
Right.
work with them to do that. I'll give them templates. We'll talk about it in detail. I'll help them figure out how to do it. But at the end of the day, they own execution.
Yeah. They
And
need to
that's
execute it.
part of coaching. And if they don't execute or they execute poorly, you could have the best playbook on the planet, but if they don't know how to run or catch a ball or whatever, then
Yeah. It's sometimes, the hardest thing to figure out if the playbook is really good or the playbook was bad or the player was good or the player was bad.
well, in my case, I know the playbook is good because I've been using
Right.
it for a long time.
Right. Right.
I know this works. You just got to do it this way. Trust me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know the playbook is good. Now,
Yeah.
listen, it's not going to work. The same play is not going to work. Sales is not prescriptive, right? The same thing is not going to work for every company, right?
Right.
There is no 23 steps to building it. It's not the same thing. It's not prescriptive, right? Every company is unique in the application of a solid B2B framework and practices and skills it takes time and attention and patience to understand what can be somewhat nuanced in a company depending upon the complexity of the problem they're solving or their product. So I
Right.
have to take the time to kind of settle into that, and I invest my time to understand that well enough to help the founder become, productive with effective sales practices. But it's really up to them to execute on it, not me. That's
Right.
not my job. And if I take that approach, then we're both much more likely in a position where I can walk away at some point and they can
Mm.
continue being productive with it because I'm no longer need to be actively involved in the sale.
Yeah, because they've learned the frameworks and the skills necessary
Correct.
to execute it.
Yeah.
Right. So, one of the things I'm curious about is how do you look at developing a relationship with a customer from the point of contact, from the first time you contact the customer till the time where you have your first sale? What is your approach to developing and maintaining the relationship with the customer? And usually, if you're talking about a customer in B2B, it's, let's say, multiple people, multiple titles in a company, right?
Yeah. So when I'm developing a relationship, I start with credibility, right? In other words, I'm an expert in solving this problem. I've been doing it for lots. I've dedicated my life to solving this problem, and I have a perspective on this problem set that's probably much broader than the customer because I've seen it in lots of different examples and industries and whatnot. So the first step in building a relationship with the customer is giving them a good reason why they should pay attention to you because you can you have more knowledge about the problem that they have than they do. The second thing, and importantly and more challenging, is trust.
Mm.
In other words, convincing the customer that I have their best interests in mind. And trust isn't built by just saying, hey, trust me, right? It's built by delivering on lots of small things
Mm.
consistently, showing up on time, saying that you're going to give them something and making sure you give it to them. Doing all these small things, but it's also meeting with them more frequently. So, and you probably know, and this is human nature, frequency builds familiarity,
Right.
and familiarity builds trust.
Mm.
So the first time you meet with somebody, they're like, oh, what's your name? What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. The fourth time you meet with them, hey, how's it going? Good to see you. How's things going? You start to build the rapport and trust
Right.
with them, right? And you're convinced that this person has your best interests in mind, right? That's the second part of building a relationship. That's the foundation of sales, is credibility and trust. Once you've built that foundation, then you've earned the right to start talking about solving their problem, but they'll give you a green light on that. People will let you know when they're ready to learn about how you solve their problem. If you start explaining how you solved their problem before they give you the green light, you're wasting your time because you haven't established the credibility or the trust.
So,
So
what are
people
the
say, oh, that's really, really interesting, Kent. So what is it that you guys do? How do you solve this problem? That's really cool. Those are great insights. How do you solve that problem? Right. The next step in building that relationship is to describe the benefits that they can expect from doing business with me and using my product. Not the capabilities, not the features, the benefits, right? And I want to explain the benefits to them in their words, in their language, in their sort of vernacular that I've learned from speaking with them. And now that they understand the benefits and I've got their attention, now I can show them and describe how I solved the problem. So finally, I get to the demo. Finally, I get to the capabilities, the architecture, the features, the differentiators, the unique selling capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. But that comes last. So capabilities of your product, it's always highly valuable in sales, but it's usually measured last. And
right?
when people start with that first, that's where you lose a sale. You start
Why?
talking about features. If you start talking about features and capabilities before you convince people are convinced you have their best interests in mind and that you're credible, right? And there's value behind what you're explaining to them, you're just wasting your time by demoing your product.
Right. So, when you say frequent, what is your usual recommendation? So, you you call the customer and then you follow up after a week, or is it after 3 days, 4 days?
All right. So here's a great example. Here's a
Hmm.
great example. The COO of a big company calls you up, says that a mutual colleague suggested that you talk and that you're solving a problem that they care about. And let's talk about it. And a 45-minute conversation with this person reveals a really good fit and a level of interest, and they're qualified. They make it past the first cut. They really care about the problem that you solve. It's of active interest. They're looking for solutions. They're looking to come, and they want to learn more. Okay. So they made it through the first cut. She agrees to meet with you next Monday. And she's very busy. She only has an hour. So if you can show up at 9 o'clock, that'd be great. You show up at 9 o'clock, and this is a huge company. It's your largest opportunity. She agrees to meet with you. You show up at 9 o'clock, and you're loaded for bear. This is a
Hmm.
huge company, and you come with everything that you need. You've got your product, your demo, your services, your price list, your case studies, your competitive matrix, your ROI calculator, customer references. The 1 hour turns into a 3 hour meeting,
Hmm.
right? It's noon, and she goes, "Thank you so much. This has been so helpful. You had an answer to everything I asked. I can't think of anything else I need. Thank you so much." And you walk out of that meeting and you said, they're definitely going to be a customer. There's no way they would have spent 3 hours with me,
Right.
right? This is fantastic. They're going to be a customer. And over the next 6 weeks, it's crickets. She won't return your phone call. She won't answer. How did this go from super interested, engaged to getting ghosted? What
Right.
happened? What happened?
Well, probably she was just gathering intelligence, right?
It's called spilling all your candy in the front lobby.
Right.
I didn't build trust. I didn't build credibility. I might have built some credibility. I didn't build trust. I certainly didn't build any rapport or familiarity with her because I only met with her once.
Hmm.
So the right sales behavior under that would have been, okay, it's 9:45. Hey, you know what? That's a great question. I have some more questions too. I've got a meeting across town. I've got to leave. Do you have your calendar handy? Let's set up another meeting. Are you available Thursday of next week? And I want to maybe bring in somebody from my team. I think they can do a better job of answering the regulatory question that you have. If you have somebody on your team that you want to bring as well, that's the right sales skills and behavior there. And she says, absolutely. So then you break it down into, and this is counterintuitive, but it actually works. Sales happens when you slow down and you segment your sales process, not dump all the information that you have in your first meeting.
Right.
That's a classic rookie sales behavior, is thinking that if you give people all the information they need as quickly as possible, they're going to make a decision based upon all the available facts, and they're going to become a paying customer. And that's not how people are wired.
Right. So, what is the cadence that you recommend salespeople usually share information or go from, let's say, first contact to try to make the first
Sure.
sale? Is it like within a month, 2 months, 3 months? What is the cadence you recommend, or how do you recommend that people figure that out for themselves, depending on the industry, product, customer,
Yeah, I mean,
price, and so on?
yeah, it really does depend upon the nature, the complexity of the problem, et cetera, et cetera. Is this an annual problem? But finding about the timing, a lot of it can be defined by the customer
Hmm.
themselves. Like, is this a problem? Is this, a this month problem, a this quarter problem, or a this year problem, or is it next year problem, right? Finding about their timing helps you to adjust your cadence and your frequency of interaction and so forth, so you can align your activities with their buying cycle. So
Right.
it really depends upon, some industries have, annual buying cycles. Some companies have a planning cycle where they create budgets. If you're involved with helping to define that budget for the following year, defines your cadence, your frequency of interaction, or et cetera. Some of them are, you might talk to a customer where they have already exercised 90% of their buying decision making by looking at competitive solutions, and you're coming at the end because they just met you. And now you have to giddy up, and you might have to meet with them 3 or 4 times, over the next month, just to catch up with their understanding of how your product aligns with other things that they're looking at. So there is no sort of one size fits all in terms of the cadence there. Understanding customers' timing and cadence is a really important sales skill.
Right.
It's something that you have to learn with each different customer, and it's different from each customer. I mean, I think about it simply in terms of, I think sales opportunities are perishable like food,
Right.
right? And, is there a sandwich sitting on the countertop that somebody's going to eat? Maybe me, right? Well, that's going to require a little bit more attention and frequency of engagement versus something that's sitting in the fridge versus something that's sitting in the freezer. So
Right.
understanding that timing, is an important skill in sales that helps you sort of gauge the frequency of your interaction with the customer.
Right. And manage your activities according to that, right?
Correct, correct. And that's
Yeah.
one, I'm not a big fan of CRM tools, by the way, but that's one thing that CRM tools are good at is putting something in a calendar and having it remind you that you have to do something as a next step with a customer that might be months out that you otherwise might forget.
Right. So why are you not a fan of a CRM tool? Because it is something that every company has and every salesperson works with.
If you ever go ask a high performing salesperson what they like about their CRM tool, Mo, and what are they going to say?
I have no freaking idea.
What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think
I've never met a really good salesperson that feels like their CRM tool is helping them with sales. It's a duty, it's a responsibility they have to keep management and the founder informed as to their performer.
right.
It is helpful in a team sales collaboration, but it doesn't displace or take the place of a team meeting around the pipeline. So you can keep a list, but you can keep a list in an Excel spreadsheet or a list on the wall, right? The
Right.
problem with a CRM tool is it could take precious sales attention, sales talent away from a great salesperson with customer time, right?
Mm.
This is why whenever I work with a client that's building a sales team, one of the things I do is I hire somebody whose job responsibility is keeping the CRM tool up to date for all the salespeople, including the founder. So they're not dragged away from that because it's just not a good use of their time.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Because it is used in most places for reporting, and salespeople need to take time out of the calendar to, fill in all the
Right.
information
And once
stuff,
you
right?
start building a sales team, then if it's not in the CRM tool, then it didn't happen because you're using the CRM tool to drive the team sales discussion and the pipeline review.
Right.
But you don't want to take precious sales talent away from what they do. So you can find, maybe you have a BDR, SDR on the top of the sales funnel, and part of their job is to keep the CRM tool up to date for the salesperson that this person is supporting.
Right. And coming back to, developing customer and let's say communicating with the customer, at what point in time do you think it makes sense to start asking questions about budget, decision makers inside the company and all these things that you definitely want to know, but
Oh, you
maybe
mean
it's
starting to behave like a salesperson?
yeah, exactly. Because I mean, these are because
Oh
these
yeah,
are important piece of information you need to know.
people will give you clues.
Yeah,
That's really interesting. What's the next step here? Where do we go from here? That's awesome. What's your process now? They will open the door for you to do that. If you try to bust through that door before they open it for you, it's not going to end well.
right. So that's the precise reason I'm asking this question. So when do you think it makes sense? At what point in time in, developing that
When
relationship?
you hear those buying cues, when you
Mhm.
hear those cues, when you hear them say something like, really enjoyed the last 3, 4 meetings with you. It's been really informative. We love what you're doing. What's your next step?
Right,
Or where do you guys go from here? What's your pricing look like? They ask you about your pricing. Well, what does your buying look like? If they ask you about your pricing, you can ask them, what's your procurement, process look like? What's your timing on this?
right.
Et cetera. So it's a sort of a give and take,
Give and take.
kind of thing. But it's been my experience that people will give you cues when they're ready to have a discussion around the procurement process itself, the budget, the timing, the people involved, the stakeholders, that kind of stuff.
Right. So in your
One of
view,
the things,
yeah,
one of the early signals is getting beyond the one-on-one conversation. A lot of sales die. They begin and end with a one-on-one conversation. You never get past that one-on-one conversation. And that's a universal buying signal. That's a universal milestone in any sale, is getting beyond the one-on-one conversation inside an organization.
what does that mean? I mean, getting different stakeholders together to, let's say, discuss different topics.
Involving others on their team in the sales discussion,
Hmm.
because now it's a legitimate team's purchase, not individuals. And
Right.
once they start they start using precious team resources to have a conversation with you. That means that's a buying signal,
Right.
right? If they don't let you get past them, that's them telling you that they're not going to buy from you, but they still want to spend time learning more.
So you
So that's
definitely, so you definitely don't recommend, us being direct and asking all this question in the first couple of meetings with a customer.
Yeah, you basically want to expand the sales conversation to other people on their team,
Hmm.
and you want to start connecting them with people on your team.
And that's the point where you start, talking about budget,
Bingo.
requirements,
Yep.
timeline, and so on.
Yep. Yep. So now you've got your CTO talking to their chief scientists, and now you've got your director of services talking to their operations person, and your product manager talking to their process manager, and you're talking to the senior VP as the founder, and you're starting to have that team on team discussion. That's when right. And that's when you start to have that discussion. But
Right.
you have to get beyond that one-on-one conversation before you get, and they're not going to let you beyond the one-on-one conversation unless they're legitimately qualified unless they're genuinely interested in making a purchase.
Right. Because
And
they
if they
want,
don't let
yeah.
you beyond the one-on-one, you disqualify them. Sorry, it's
Yeah. I mean,
been a great conversation, but
what are some of the best ways to disqualify, let's say, a potential customer? And what point in time would you think about
great question. Now you're
disqualifying a
getting
customer?
into one of my favorite topics.
That's great.
Because if I make the statement that you have to, sales is about disqualifying, you really have to have a method behind that, don't you?
Right. Right.
So two ways. One is, so in sales, no is your second best answer, and the slow no is your worst, right? So the problem is people are not forthcoming with no, right? People don't like to say no, right? It creates friction. Maybe they have another agenda. They feel like they're being rude, et cetera, et cetera. So you, as the salesperson, have to own no. So instead of driving to a yes, and you asked about timing, you have to own no very early in the sales conversation. You have to say, hey, listen, we solve an important problem for companies just like yours, and I can explain it to you in 2 minutes. And if at the end of 2 minutes this isn't interesting to you, please say no. No problem. Give them permission to say no.
Right. So
So ask for no.
you would do that right in the first
Right,
customer
right from
meeting.
the get-go. Right from the get-go. So you want to find that no, you want to find the but, you want to find the object, you want to actively seek those things that are going to prevent you from moving forward as early as possible in the sale. And one of them is owning no and giving people permission to say no. And you do that very early in the sales conversation.
But
Later
Mhm.
in the conversation, a very effective way of removing false positives from your pipeline is what I call off-ramping. And this is giving people the option to exit your sales process for whatever reason that might make sense given the circumstances. So off-ramping is a very effective way of helping people exit your sales process on their own. They either self-select in or self-select out based upon their response to the answer. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're talking with a company, been talking with them for 4 months, and you've had 5 conversations, very productive, and all of a sudden they go radio silent. They stop returning your calls for a month and a half. right? And you're just like, oh, what happened? I thought it was going really, really well. You catch the person, you decide to call them up at 8 o'clock in the morning before they get into their day. They lift up the phone, you catch them, you say, Jane, oh, I'm so glad that you answered the phone. I was a little concerned that we lost momentum in our discussion here. You must be really, really busy. What do you say we just put our conversation on hold for a couple months, and then once you're past what you're doing right now, we can pick up our conversation. Is that okay? Well, that's a very considerate thing to offer, is it not? Right? Well, the stalling signal from Jane might be, you know what, Kent, you're exactly right. Thank you very much. You'll never hear from her again. Or, you know what, Kent, I'm so sorry. Myself and my team have been heads down for the past 6 weeks doing our budget for next year. By the way, you're in it, and let's pick up our conversation next week. I really apologize for not answering your calls. That's an off-ramp. Stalling signal, buying signal.
Right. So
That's
even
an
though
example.
a customer is further down your sales funnel,
Yeah.
right? So if they are not, moving forward, if the conversation is stalling, you find a way
Give
to,
them an
let's say,
off-ramp.
off ramp just to save
Yeah,
time
and
for,
and it
yeah.
might be, hey, you know what? I know you're looking at less expensive products. There's less expensive products out there than ours, right? Have you looked at product X or product Y before looking at what we do? That's an off-ramp
Hmm.
because you're not sure how you measure up in terms of the competition or where are they in their sales process. Because if they're further along in their sales process, they're looking at the alternatives. So if their response is, no, we haven't looked at X or Y, you know that the sale is very early, or they're not even going to buy,
Hmm.
because if they're going to buy, they're looking at the alternatives versus, oh yeah, we looked at X or Y. That's why we're talking to you. Those are non-starters.
So that's the
Right. But
answer you're
also
looking for.
when you offer up your competition, it tells the customer that you're very comfortable overcoming the differences there in price, but also it shows them that you have their best interests in mind, right? Because you're helping them do their homework. So there's lots of different types of off ramp. They come in many different colors. It could be related to pricing, to value, to competition, to buying process, or whatever. But I make very frequent use of off ramps later in. It's a way of kind of pressure testing the deal and giving people the option to exit the sales process without behaving like a salesperson. Because it might be that they have a legitimate reason for not talking with you, but maybe down the road, they're still going to want to be, they still could be a great customer. It's just not now. So it's an elegant way of sort of pressure testing whether a deal is valid or not. Basically taking ambiguity and turning it into a clear stalling or buying signal that you can make a decision on.
Yeah, right. And then you can, if they are not up to it, if they're not interested, you can just move on and
Yeah,
give your time to some other customer, right?
bingo.
Just be efficient, right? And for people like you and myself, I mean, being too impatient can definitely kill the whole
Oh
sales
yeah.
proposition, right?
Oh, yeah.
So how have you helped yourself to develop the required patience of going through this whole process?
Well, it's called the patience paradox.
So could you please explain that?
You're just like, you want to move it along as quickly as possible and get to talk to the
Yeah,
people,
because
get to check the boxes. Come on, let's go, folks. Let's go. Come
yeah,
on.
because
What are you
you got to
doing? What
hit
are
the
you doing?
numbers, you've got to hit your
Yeah,
targets.
yeah, exactly. Let's get to the numbers. Let's sharpen your pencil, folks. Let's go.
Yeah.
People don't show up to my meetings with their A game, Amal, and I'm very impatient with that. Listen, companies move at their own pace.
Right.
They have their own ethos. They have their own values. They have their own timing. They move at their own culture. And you have to, it's how they buy that's more important than how you sell. And you have to come in and learn enough of that and fit within their process and their timing, not yours.
Right.
So what I've figured out how to do over time is to ask the right questions so that I can gauge my own behavior in a way that's more compatible with them, not try to force factor them onto my impatient time frame.
Right. Yeah, especially big companies, I mean, if the product is, let's say, a high-end product, they need to like validate it, blah blah. It takes a
They
whole lot
move
of
like a
time.
snail. They move
Yeah,
like a snail.
exactly.
And all the time, I can't tell you how many times in a coaching session with a founder, I'm like, don't send them another email right now. It's way too soon. It's been 2 weeks. No, no, no. They're still looking at it. Trust me. Give them some time. They'll come back. And by the way, you're busy, right? You're too busy to be hounding them every week or two. Just give them some time. They'll come back. And then 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, they surface back. Yes, we've done the next step. And yes, we've confirmed that that's exactly right. This thing is costing us X, and, there's a couple of examples that I'm willing to share with you. Thank you for your patience,
Right.
right? They just move at a different pace.
Right. But you've got to hit your numbers because you're under pressure. So how do you
Well,
go
that's
about
all the more reason why you have to work a whole bunch of deals at the same time.
exactly?
Here's my rule of thumb. You look at the last step of your sales process,
Hmm.
which is what I call an active opportunity, or your top 10 deals. The weighted value of your top 10 deals needs to be 3x your revenue forecast.
Right. So basically, fill it up so it's three times the
Three
number that you
times.
need to achieve.
Correct.
And that's, you know, the
That's going to
the
make up for the timing that you can't control.
yeah, exactly. But I think
Or the lost deal because your champion disappeared in a mudslide out in California, or
right.
something else you can't control.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. But I think it's a good rule of thumb.
It works pretty well. It's a good rule of thumb. It does require, again, it gets back to velocity of leads. It
Right.
gets back to balancing your sales activity, not just picking winners, but building them, developing them, getting more leads in, following up on things that you promised to do in the middle of your funnel, right? And giving attention to the entire funnel versus narrowing all your attention to the top 2 or 3 deals that you think are going to close, right?
Right.
You're going to end up on a roller coaster and that's again, getting back to your attitude and your behavior, right? If you're picking winners, you're going to suffer as a result of that.
Right. So you need to have the discipline to, let's say, work on your winners, possible winners, but also at the same time, let's say, develop your funnel, develop the customers, and so on and so forth at the same
Yeah. You
time.
look at Wall Street, right? Stock pickers,
Hmm.
they live a feast or famine existence, like this. The folks that make money on Wall Street are the folks that have a portfolio, right? That goes up over time because they have got lots of bets and they're
Right.
paying attention to taking underperforming things out and moving new prospects in, et cetera, et cetera. And they're maturing, a portfolio, and sales is the same thing.
Right. Ken, it's been a great conversation with you. It's been a great time speaking to you. Just being, with respect to your time.
I really appreciate it. You got great questions and you're fun to talk with. So I really appreciate
Thank you so much. Thank you so
meeting
much.
with you as well.
And I learned a lot. And if people want to find you or learn more about your material, things, courses you are offering, where can they find you? What's the best
No,
way to
no,
look you
thank
up?
you. So I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, just
Hmm.
Kent Summers. And, you can find me there. I also have a book on Amazon called Startup Sales Field Notes.
Right.
And that's my notes from all of my startups and all my learnings. And thanks to COVID, I was able to plow my MIT sales course into a book format. So that went up there just a few years ago. And I find
Right.
that founders find that, really helpful. And I got a lot of information in there, but that's directly to my MIT sales course. So either through LinkedIn or, just shoot me an email, Kent@spinnakersales.com. I'm happy to always take phone calls with anyone that is interested in learning more.
Right. So I'll definitely put down the links in the show notes when I post the
Thank you.
episode.
Appreciate that.
You're
Good
welcome.
talking with you, Emil.
Good talking with you as well. Thank you
Over
so
over
much.
here is lunchtime, and over there, I believe it's cocktail hour.
No, no, no. It's, 4 p.m., 4:20.
That's beer o'clock here.
Beer o'clock. Do you enjoy drinking beer every day, or do you do it on the
Pretty
weekends?
much.
Pretty
Oh
much.
yeah. I don't drink a lot, but I'm really consistent.